Thank you for being here. Make sure to share and like. All right. Talking about pleiocene man in America. Pleiocene. If you don't know what that means, we're going to discuss that, break that down. Um, Out of place fossils, out of place artifacts that they have found, things that don't get mentioned or publicized that much, put into textbooks because it doesn't fit the historic narrative. So, what we see here in front of us is just an example of what we're going to be talking about. This is from the Calaveras Enterprise. So here, the Calaveras skull, bones of contention. Well, Calaveras is a Spanish word for skulls. One skull in particular stands out in the country's history. This was a fossil that ended up in the hands of William Jones, a physician in Murphy's and avid collector of natural artifacts, in 1866. It wasn't the skull itself that was of note in appearance. It was similar to many found before. It was the place in which the skull was said to be found. All right, so that's the main thing, where it was found, which proves its age. You know, so we're gonna get into the information here. It says Jones was told that the skull was found among ancient gravels about 130 feet below the surface in James Madison's mine shaft on Bald Hill, just outside of Angel's Camp. If the skull was deposited at the same time as the surrounding gravels, it would make it the oldest known human fossil in the New World and between 2.6 million and 5.3 million years old. All right. So those are the implications. That's how old this would be. Logically, if they're finding it in these places, in these depths, where the gravel goes back to these periods, geologists know how to date these things. I'm going to show you some examples of this stuff. But again, we're going to get all the information today. I'm going to read a lot today. Hope you guys enjoy it. Hope you know. All right, so here is the colorized version of it. This is a black and white version. About a couple of geological timescales here, in case you guys are not familiar with this. Geological timescales. We just read, they were talking about 2.3 to almost 5.6 million years ago. So we're talking about around the Tertiary period, right? And we're talking about from the Pleiocene on. Right, so Pleiocene, right? The title of this video is Pleiocene Man. We're talking about 1.6 million years and older. You gotta understand that in Europe, they're not even that old. The oldest humans in Europe, bones they found, as you can see here, is after that. Pleistocene. Says here, earliest humans appear. Ice Age begins. So the Pleiocene, very important, is before the Ice Age. Before supposedly America was covered with ice. We got to dodge the hijack big time because we're going with their chronologies and their carbon datings and their geological timescales. But, based on their own teachings in science, the age of this skull and where they found it and what logically we can conclude. So again, just some examples you guys can understand before, because they start talking about scientific stuff. So we just want to be able to understand what they're talking about. And so this is an example. You see the land. They can see the different layers. As you see here, geological time, deciphering Earth's history, creating time scale. Pennsylvania strata right here, Mississippi strata down here, Devonian strata, Cambrian strata. And these are just examples of what we're talking about today. A couple of pictures, the different layers. All right, and then we start talking about fossilized organic things that became fossilized, right? So, so I mean, just look at this image right here. Right here on the right, this almost looks like a tree or a plant or something, huh? Fossilized, all right? So again, different examples of what we're going to be talking about today. All right, these images might help a little bit more. You see the different levels that they would find things, and then they'll be able to determine how old something is. So of course, if it's a plant that is supposed to be there and it's fossilized, they say, oh yeah, look, it's 2.6 million years old. Now, if right next to that plant, fossilized plant, they find a tooth, a stone implement, or a weapon, or stone pottery, or something that shows that it was humans or humans there, then they'll tell you, oh, no, it must have fell in there. That no, it must be a hoax. Yeah, it's probably a hoax. Yeah, it's a hoax. Of course, it's not there. So again, we're talking about Pleiocene man. It says between 1.8 and 5.3 million years ago. Pleiocene, as you can see, the different layers, and you see they have little examples of the bone and everything. So again, this is just another example, the different levels. And gravel right here, how they would find, bones and all that, extinct animal bones. And again, that's what basically was going on in the 1800s in these areas in California, especially here in Calaveras County. Right. Geological time scale. Look at that. They got a gas station in a city, and right under the city in the gas station, look what you got. Right. Again, they're representing Pleiocene right here in this gray layer. And they got like a, see, they won't put human bones. They put this, they're probably trying to interpret this as a monkey or ape man right here. And then the human bone after that. So, because that's what they got in Europe. But actually, this human bone is down here in the Americas. They found numerous, the geological timescale according to what they go off, right? At the time, this is a drawing of the skull. It's here, University of California. And it says here, Geological Survey of California, J.D. Whitney, State Geologist. All right, Paleontology, State Geologist. Paleontology, Volume 2. Cretaceous and Tertiary Fossils by W.M. Gabb. This is from 1869. So, this book kind of lists what they just found. It's not like a lot of information. I just wanted to show you that they actually listed this here on page 88. It says here Pleiocene, right? Pleiocene. We already know the time scale, right? We're talking about millions, at least 1.6 million years or older, between that and 5.8 million. So it could be up to 6 million years old. Pleiocene with human skull, right? Near Angels Camp, Calaveras County. They noted it down. Where does it say anything about being a hoax or anything like that? Here. Pleiocene with human skull. The 1849 gold rush to the state of California was the beginning of some of the most unusual reported finds of early man in North America. The gold-bearing gravels in California are recognized as being tertiary. I remember what that was. That's millions of years old. We're talking about at least 1.6 and up. And older. At the time of these gravels were deposited volcanic eruptions also laid down lava beds, often tens of scores of feet thick. So, there's gravel, and then there's lava flows on top of that, and other layers. So you got a picture of this. Remember the images we were showing earlier with the different layers. This occurred a number of times, and together with much erosion since then, have now resulted in the Table Mountains. The Table Mountains, that is lava-capped hills, where the harder lava has better withstood erosion stresses, while surrounding softer material has been swept away. It is under the hard lava beds in the gold-bearing auriferous gravels where the reported human bones and artifacts were found. Such artifacts were found not just once or twice, but hundreds of times. Again, hundreds of times. It's not just about the Calaveras skull. Hundreds of times by miners during the span of time from the 1850s through the 1890s, while engaged in mining operations. Findings were spread over a wide geographical area. All right? Gosh, the hijack. You're rewriting history. That there is large body of evidence, the strength of which it is impossible to deny, which seems to prove that man existed in California previous to the cessation of volcanic activity in the Sierra Nevada, to the epoch of the greatest extension of the glaciers in that region, and to the erosion of the present river canyons and valleys at a time when the animal and vegetable creations differed entirely from what they now are, and when the topographical features of the state were extremely unlike those exhibited by the present surface, that man existed even at that very remote epoch, which goes back at least far as the Pleiocene, talking about millions of years old, was still the same as we now find him to be in that region, and the same that he was in the intermediate period after the cessation of volcanic activity. Let me just read this. It says here, this is an artifact, so we know. See, they couldn't deny that this was, not human made, not artificial, because look at it. They found this in these gravels, in these auriferous gravels from the Pliocene time. How did this end up there? Because this ain't even about a skull. So are you saying this fell in there too? Mortar and pestle found in auriferous gravel, Spanish Plat, El Dorado County, California, University of California, Berkeley. Says here, figure 2, pestle found in auriferous gravel, Kincaid Flat, Tulum County, California, University of California, Berkeley, designation 1420. Says here, Becker gives account after account of discoveries in these gold-bearing gravels in California. In 1877, the superintendent of Moctezuma Tunnel Company found several spearheads of some dark rock and nearly 1 foot in length, a small mortar 3 or 4 inches in diameter, and of irregular shape, a large well-formed pestle, and nearby a large and very regular mortar. And in the statement made before a notary public on August 2nd, 1890, the superintendent, Mr. Neal, declared upon oath that all of these relics were found the same afternoon and were within a few feet of one another and close to the bedrock. All right. And that it was utterly impossible that these relics can have reached the position in which they were found, excepting at the time the gravel was deposited. It didn't fall in there, is what they're telling you. It was there when with everything else that was in there during that time and before the lava cap formed. All right, these are people telling you an oath. Hey, master, I saw it. I saw it. I swear I saw it. There was not the slightest trace of any disturbance of the mass or of any natural fissure into it by which access could have been obtained either there or in the neighborhood. Figure 5, pestle found in a roofer's gravel, forest home, Amador County, California, University of California, Berkeley. Figure 4, pestle found in auriferous gravel, El Dorado County, California, University of California. The objection of that these objects somehow found their way into the gravels from modern-day Indian cultures on the surface was used for many years against any idea that they are ancient artifacts. Yet, as Skirchley, 1888, says that they cannot have come from the surface, for none are ever found there. So he made a great point there, and many of them have been seen by Mr. Glass with the original gravel adherent to them. The original gravel stuck to the bone, all right, it's stuck to it. Occasionally, mortars are found on the surface in the neighboring gulches, but only where the gulch has intersected the gravels, and these mortars are clearly derived from the old white gravels. Furthermore, Scarcely reports that this country was inhabited by the Digger Indians until about the year 1865. My friend, Mr. Glass, was well acquainted with them and assures me that they do not use such mortars. So even the local Indians are telling them, man, that's not us, man. That's not our stuff, man. We don't do that. We don't use that to do that. That's not our stuff, man. Stop trying to give us credit for that. That's not our stuff. They're letting them know they hollowed out rocks in situ and there impounded the acorns on which they so largely subsisted. They were acquainted with these mortars, but knew nothing about the markers of them, and held them in such superstitious dread that on no account could they be induced to touch one. This dread of the relics of past ages seems to be everywhere common, and is of itself proof of antiquity. And this is one right here, figure 8, small point mortar found near Georgetown, El Dorado County, California. It's a more recent book by the American Museum of Natural History, Hester, 1962, makes the following comments regarding the earlier mentioned C.J. King find. If the gravels in which the pestle was found and the lava which lay just above it were indeed products of the Pliocene period, which preceded the Great Ice Age, then we have to face a staggering idea here. We have to believe that a strain of Homo sapiens originated in the New World. What originated where? In the new so-called New World. Listen to what they're telling you right here. They had to admit all these finds are like in these times, but then what happened? Somebody comes talking about nope, Bering Strait, 2,000, 12,000 years ago. That's it. That's it. And everybody else believed it and went with it. But they're letting you know right here, we have to believe that a strain of Homo sapiens originated in the New World long before Java, man. Long before Java, man. Yo, man. Yeah, man. Yeah, man. Yeah, man. Yeah. We have to believe that he acquired the skills of the new Stone Age, far ahead of man in the old world. They're talking about on the other side of the world. It was here first, far before them, far before. Pay attention, break the spell. Far before. And that he then disappeared. Oh, you disappeared. Oh, now again you disappeared, just like the Maya disappeared, the Hopi disappeared, on the side, all these people disappeared, right? The Aztecs disappeared. Where did they go? They went to Mars, right? That's what they want us to think. Oh, they disappeared, right? So these people disappeared, right? Is it easier? But not too easy to think that the lava flowed in recent times after glacial water had worked its pestle of early man into the gold-bearing gravels, which could push the seed grinders of California far, far back in time. It is still easier to believe that King was out of his head. It should be noted that California Indians, except along the Colorado River, never did develop a Neolithic or agricultural level of technology. These implements found in the gold-bearing gravels are therefore outstanding in many ways. Scarcely reports that 300 of them have been found. 300? 300. So you're talking about, oh, they all fell in there. They all just fell in there. Those are the ones you found and declared. Those are the official ones. Because the rest of them, what? They got lost, destroyed, taken, right? Hidden, not mentioned. They were found by many people over a span of at least 40 years while mining operations were almost active. They were they were found in sites distributed over a vast area of country. Their appearance is found in the gold-bearing gravels, except when it was obvious that they had been eroded out of such a gravel layer. They are not from the Digger Indians, who would have nothing to do with them. They're not from the modern Indians, as they're letting them know. They're not reported to be found on the uppermost soil layers. The implements are associated with fossil flora and fauna, which is pre-glacial in nature. All right, pre-glacial. This is old. All right, this is old. The fact that the gravels are of such ancient age and the implements are of such advanced nature, advanced. They're not just old, they're advanced, that their signs are advanced, contradict the commonly held theories of human evolution. Your theories, all right, we're breaking down, destroying your theories. Wow, breaking down your theories of human evolution. The finds, if valid, present major problems. They present major problems for all commonly held ideas of how and when man evolved. A recent article in Nature, 1988, page 107 from Bray says that many archaeologists do not think humans lived in either North or South America until 11,500 years ago, right? That's the hijack. That's the hijack. The gatekeepers, right? The gatekeepers. And the serious debate concerning early man in the Americas focused on just a few sites dated between 20,000 and 40,000 years ago. Findings of implements and fossils of early man in pre-glacial rock layers were cited by scientists of the last century, 1800s, not only in the gold-bearing layers of California, but around the world. Around the world. So again, we already know, right? Where are they finding this? In the Pleiocene, millions of years old. The case of the Calaveras skull. This is the earliest known picture of the Calaveras skull, taken before all the original matrix surrounding the skull was removed. The Calaveras skull was found in 1866 at Bald Hill near Angels Camp in Calaveras County, California. The original photo dates from sometime between 1866 and 1868, when the skull was transported to Cambridge, Massachusetts, and there thoroughly cleaned and examined scientifically from a photo. All right. So what? It was examined what? Scientifically. So what did they say? They must, if it's a hoax, if it's fake, they must have definitely determined it was fake, right? Right? Logically, if they examined it scientifically in MIT and Harvard and Peabody Museum, I've been there. I've been to the Peabody Museum in Harvard. It's a great collection of natural history. I used to love going there in school school trips. You know, day trips, school field trips. Yeah, the field trips. Those were fun. I used to always like history. That was one of my favorite places to go. The Peabody Museum in Massachusetts, right there, part of Harvard. They had so many cool things. I wish I knew they had the skull. I would have asked, "Hey, are you guys gonna bring out the skull so I can see it?" So this is a photo in the University of California library. Okay, this is from the. They have this photo. So why they have all this stuff if it was a hoax? Why would they be, recording this, taking pictures of it? All right, here's a colorized version of it. Once it was cleaned, this is after it was cleaned. The Calaveras skull was discovered in 1866 in a gold-bearing gravel dated by conventional geology as tens of millions of years older than man's supposed origin. It initiated one of the greatest controversies over American fossil finds of ancient man. All individuals connected with the original find believe it to be genuine, including the famous 19th century geologist. Look, famous, all right, not just anybody they can just push over. This is actually one of their colleagues, one of the most famous 19th century geologists, J.D. Whitney, who made it widely known. Later, a ferocious attack by both evolutionists, right, Darwinism and all that, started attacking him, and some religionists, right, religion people, because it's not supposed to go past 6,000 years, and I understand that part. But again, we're gonna go with their so-called data, and then, hey, we just gotta switch the story up then, and let's get it all together then. What's going on? By the religious branded the skull as merely a trick played upon the unsuspecting finder, Madison, and the geologist examiner, Whitney. So we're gonna hear how all of a sudden that after it was declared official fossil and everything, they started saying it was a hoax. It was actually a joke they were playing on the guy who they gave it to. They were playing a joke on him. So that's their explanation that not even they didn't want money, they didn't want to be famous or funding. They just wanted to play a joke. That's their explanation. And again, I didn't find no proof of that. There's no proof of any of that because we're going to keep reading. We're going to see what was the conclusions, and the scientific analysis of the historical facts shows the skull should be taken seriously. It should be taken seriously as one of the most mysterious and probably most significant human fossil finds on the North American continent. The authors believe the Calaveras skull and hundreds of associated human artifacts have withstood the test of time and constitute remarkable evidences of an ancient man existing in America before the commencement of the post-flood Ice Age. On June 18, 1866, Dr. William Jones of Murphy, California, sent a letter to the State Geological Survey of California regarding a recently discovered fossil human skull. A Mr. Madison had personally found the skull in his mining shaft at Bald Hill in Angels Camp, California, 130 feet below the surface of the beneath cap of lava. The skull had been embedded in auriferous gold-bearing tertiary gravels adjacent to a petrified log. Next to a petrified log, okay? This would place the time of the skull before the commencement of the Pleistocene and long before the accepted time of man's arrival on Earth. Long before, according to evolutionary geology. Mr. Madison had first thought it was root of the petrified log. Later, after some close examination and probing, he was surprised to discover it was a human skull. Mr. Dabby, California State Paleontologist, asked us that the skull be delivered to the State Geological Survey in San Francisco. Dr. Jones compiled and the skull was received by the survey on June 29, 1866. A few days later, the prestigious head of the California Geological Survey, J.D. Whitney, who had been out of town at the time of notification, returned to San Francisco and first examined the skull. Mr. Madison, the discoverer of the fossil skull, later related to Whitney how the skull had been found. Madison said he personally dug the skull from gold-bearing gravels in his Bald Hill mine shaft in February 1866. He took it to John Scribner, a store owner and agent for Wells Fargo and Angel's Camp. When Scribner received the skull, it was, it says here, stony material that he, Scribner, did not recognize what it was. Mr. Scribner's clerk cleaned off a portion of the encrusted material, discovering that the article in question was a human skull, not a tree root, as first supposed by Madison, and shortly after gave it to Dr. Jones, a nearby Murphy's, who was well known in that region as an enthusiastic collector of objects of natural history. When delivered into the writer's hand, its base was embedded in a conglomerate mass of ferruginous earth, water-worn pebbles of much altered volcanic rock, calcareous tufa, and fragments of bones. This mixed material covered the whole base of the skull and filled the left temporal fossa, concealing the whole of the jaw. A thin calcareous incrustation appears to have covered the whole skull when found. Portions of it had been scalped off, probably in cleaning away the other material attached to the base. Whitney, 1880. 2 or 3 years after the skull's discovery, the San Francisco religious newspaper, right? So, religious newspaper, the Pacific sent a reporter to the area of the discovery. So, they send their little agent, right? The reporter received apparently almost, if not quite exactly, the same statements from them which had previously been given to the writer by the same man, and then returned to San Francisco and wrote and published the following. Strange memory this, we thought, to retain such minute particulars of such a supposed unimportant discovery 2 years before. About 1883, 3 years after the publication of Whitney's monumental book, Dr. A.S. Hudson of Stockton, California, was reported by William Holmes to have visited Angels, California, and interviewed Scribner and Madison. In the words of Holmes, Dr. Hudson was convinced, after talking with Scribner, that no deception whatever had been practiced. This is from Holmes, again, a very reputable person. Holmes is stating all this. In 1899, when Dr. Hudson interviewed Madison, he showed Mr. Madison and his wife the figure or cut copied from Professor Whitney's book. Mrs. Madison, also known by the name of Madison, at once recognized the picture as representing the specimen in question. It was said that the cemented gravel so adhered to as to fill out the back head and make it look a natural occipital portion. All right, so they're describing how the skull looked. All right, this is not a prank, meaning people cannot make the skull look like that. That's from years and years and years. All right, more than one skull involved. Remember that it's not just the Calaveras skull. One of Dr. Hudson's purposes was to investigate the accusations made by those who opposed Whitney's by saying that the Calaveras skull was a deliberate hoax. The information regarding this hoax interpretation is convoluted. The varying accounts conflict as to who perpetrated the hoax and upon whom the supposed hoax was played, all right? What emerges from all these conflicting accounts is that the joke, not a hoax, was played on someone, certainly not Whitney, at a later date. The joke involved a different skull from the famous Calaveras skull found by Madison. The later joke apparently was an idea hatched when someone read a humorous poem written by Bret Harte entitled The Pleiocene Skull, which made fun of the skull. The poem was first published on July 28, 1866, only 12 days after Whitney's first officially alerted the scientific world of California. Now, since here, some believe that the Joker skull, not the Calaveras skull found by Madison, originally came from the cave burial before being planted in the mine. In reviewing the circumstances of the Calaveras skull and the later Joker skull, John C. Merriam, it says, if the Calaveras skull came from a cave, it still remains to show how it finally passed into Whitney's possession as a relic from the auriferous gravels. So how did it become, in this connection, several interesting items of information have come to light. One of these seems to show that even if a joke had been played upon the miner Madison, this particular joke had failed to reach the geologist Whitney. Some years ago, Professor F. W. Putnam exhibited a small photograph showing the skull in nearly the condition in which it was first seen by Whitney to residents of Angel's Camp, who claimed to have been concerned in putting the Joker's skull into Madison's mine, and was informed that this was certainly not the skull which they had put in the shaft. That's a different skull. In this connection, Dr. Sinclair has recently shown that skulls from the locality at which the Jokers were supposed to have obtained the specimen used to fool Mr. Madison are buried in a matrix quite unlike that which covered Whitney's specimen. So basically, as he said, she said, and it's all mixed up info. It's not matching, and somebody's lying. All right. So again, we're gonna go with science. We're gonna go with what's official. All right, we're almost there. Hope you guys enjoying the presentation. It says this seems to be the origin of the claim that the Calaveras skull was from a recent American Indian burial, which someone had found implanted in Madison's mind as a joke. However, it is important to note that from the very beginning of the discovery of the Calaveras skull, everyone acknowledged the Calaveras skull was truly a fossil. That's one thing these jokers, these jokers, these funny jokers forgot to think about. How can you fake a fossil? Huh? I want to ask everybody hearing me right now. How can you fake a fossil? If you're a scientist, how could I fake a fossil to you? You're the scientist, you tell me. So this is the poem. It says The Pleiocene Skull by Bret Harte, sketches of from 1870. So this is way before, like 4 years after it was discovered, right? So they're making fun of it. So, but they're kind of admitting it's a Pleiocene. They kind of gave it publicity. So look at that. He's holding the skull, right? It says, "Speak, O man, less recent, fragmentary fossil, primal pioneer of Pleiocene formation, hitting the lowest drift below the earliest stratum of volcanic tufa, older than the beast, the oldest Paleotherium, older than the trees, the oldest Cryptogania." So they made a poem making fun of it. All right, but look what they're showing you. Older than the hills, those infallible eruptions of Earth's epidermis. But you see where they're putting it. So how did it get there under all these layers? How did it fall in there from on top of the mountain? How did it just fall in there under all those layers and under the volcanic strata and all that? And they're making fun of it. All right, so this is the kind of, this poem kind of made the whole controversy and the joke more real. Everybody who saw it, all the scientists at that time, that it was a fossil. In fact, the skull is so completely fossilized that only a trace of organic matter remains in the skull, thereby preventing direct dating by carbon 14. Carbon 14 don't work in this case because it's so old. It's so old, carbon 14 don't work. Calaveras skull, an uncommon human fossil by G.F. Becker, another reputable scientist, historian. It says here, G.F. Becker, 1891, of the U.S. Geological Survey, pointed out that a rhinoceros jaw from the same horizon contained more than 2.5 times as much phosphate as carbonate and was thus much less completely fossilized than the human bone. Even the rhino, even this extinct rhino, wasn't as fossilized as the Calaveras skull. All right? This is from a reputable scientist. Truly fossilized human bones are very great rarities, and to suppose that the miners were not only successful in salting the mine with human bones, but that they procured truly fossil bones to do it with, required a painful stretch of the imagination. Use their logic, right? Their own teachings, their own conclusions to let you know, how can a person create a fossil this old and then put it there? Like, he did so many things that are impossible. This guy could have just become a millionaire instead of just doing a joke, right? He could have been a millionaire. It requires a painful stretch of imagination to think people could just do that. But further, when the skull was found, a mass of gravel indistinguishable from the surrounding materials adhered firmly, all right, to it and remained thus attached until long afterwards. Dr. Jeffries Wyman removed it in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Hence, the miners must have found it, if all at all, in a formation similar to or identical with the auriferous gravels. The supposed joke would therefore be quite without point. You get it? The joke's on them. Another individual who personally examined the Calaveras skull soon after it was discovered was William H. Dahl on January 10, 1899. He reported the following to the Academy of Natural Sciences of Philadelphia. The evidence has generally been regarded among scientific men as convincing and sufficient, in that no sufficient reason had been adduced for doubting the genuine character of the skull and its original situs below the lava. All right, this is not just one person. It's not just Whitney. It's not just the state geologists letting you know it's a fossil. So many people looked at it and already had already determined and concluded this is real. This is genuine. In 1899, Vice President Thomas Wilson of the American Association for the Advancement of Science also defended the skull's genuineness. You can verify all this information, look up the sources. We're going to get into some sources, don't worry, but look up all these sources for yourself if you want to verify. All right, so again, Thomas Wilson from the American Association of Advancement of Science, right? He also defended the skull and his address before the AAAS. Wilson quoted from an earlier address at the same meeting by Putnam, who said that man was on the American continent in quaternary times and possibly still earlier. Seems to me as certain as that he was in the old world during the same period. It's certain. It's certain. Yes, he was there, just like in the other side of the world. Yes. In addition to these men, other noted men such as L.G. Yates, E.T. Newton, President of Geological Association, and W. Iris were all in agreement and with Whitney that the Calaveras skull was not a hoax. It was not a hoax and was originally embedded in the auriferous gravel of the time of their deposition before the ice. In the words of George F. Becker, 1891, page 195, I find that many good judges are fully persuaded of the authenticity of the Calaveras skull, and Messrs. Clarence King, the director of the USGS, O.C. Marsh F.W. Putnam, and W.H. Dahl, all right, have each assured me of his conviction that this bone was found in a place in the gravel beneath the lava. All these men of reputation are letting him know. So he's like, yo, of course I'm gonna go with the general consensus of this reputable scientist. Dr. Alfred R. Wallace, too, who has seen at least some of the auriferous gravels and Table Mountains, and speaking both of the implements found and the Calaveras skull, stated that these remains present all the characteristics of genuine discoveries. Now, says here, figure 3. Contrast these views of the Calaveras skull after being cleaned and examined with one at the beginning of this article. The skull is not primitive. Or in words of Dr. Wyman, who gave the craniological peculiarities of the skull in Whitney's book, that the skull presents no sign of having belonged to an inferior race. If the fossil were truly found in tertiary auriferous gravel beneath Bald Hill, then evolutionary theory would require to be very primitive. Furthermore, full extent of the conditions of the skull when found as a fossil is revealed. In the words of Whitney, the skull had been broken in such a manner as to indicate great violent and protracted motion. The appearance of the skull was something such as would be expected to result from its having been swept with many other bones from the place where it was originally deposited down the shallow but violent current of a stream, where it would have exposed to violent blows against the boulders lying in its bed. During this passage, it was smashed, and fragments of the bone occurring with it were thrust into all cavities where they could lodge. It then came to rest somewhere, in a position where water charged with lime salts had access to it, and on bed of auriferous gravel. There were those Blake, Hydricla, Sinclair, and others who contended that the Calaveras skull was nothing more than a modern Indian cave skull, all right? Could Whitney have been fooled in this manner? The evidence would indicate no. First of all, Whitney was familiar with California cave skulls, as shown by Morato. Long ago, Whitney, 1867, removed a number of crania from the cave of skulls west of Stanislaus River near Abbott's Ferry. Like the bones from Mercer's and Moaning caves, these calcium carbonate encrusted skulls reposed on the cave floor and had not been buried deliberately. This clearly shows that Whitney was familiar with cave skulls in the area and would have been very unlikely to have confused the Calaveras skull with a cave specimen. Again, Whitney is a reputable scientist, so besides all they're saying right here, he had no reason to lie, and he was, people believed him when he said what he said. In support of Whitney's truthfulness and scientific accuracy, no less an opponent than Alice Hydricla. All right, this Alice Hydricla, we're going to learn about him right now, confirmed in 1907 that differences existed between the original condition of the Calaveras skull nearby cave specimens. Though Hydricla argued that the Calaveras skull was a cave specimen, he nevertheless made the following significant statement: none of the cave skulls taken by G.S. Hitto from caves in Calaveras County showed any adhesion of gravel. If the Calaveras skull were originally from a cave deposit, then why did it have gold-bearing gravel adhering to it? So even this guy who's a major hijack said, man, but how does it have this gravel on it? All right. And further corroboration that the Calaveras skull was not originally from a cave environment, we have the following first-hand account by Aries. Wherever it might have been first found, it surely was embedded in the auriferous gravel, and it had been become so embedded at the time the gravel was originally deposited. You say that it is a bold assertion. How do you know? I will tell you. I know it because the skull told me so. Okay, so the guy writing this is a scientist. He knows how to determine. He knew geology. You know what it was a fossil. You know he knows. So he looked at the bone and it told him. What does he mean? Well, I saw it and examined it carefully at the time when it was first reached Professor Whitney Sands. It was not only encrusted with sand and gravel, but its cavities were crowded with the same material. And that material was a sort of peculiar sort which I had occasion to know thoroughly. It was the common cement or dirt of the miners, that known in books as the auriferous gravel. It is not easily imitated. No skill possessed by Mr. Madison or anyone else could have been sufficient to give the skull the character which it had when I saw it. Nobody can fake that, he's letting you know. It is most certainly no fabrication, but it has been said that it is a modern skull which has become encrusted after a few years of interment. This assertion, however, is never made by anyone known in the region. The gravel has not the slightest tendency toward an action of that sort. The skull would either decay and waste away, or it would remain unchanged, and added to this comes in the fact that the hollows of the skull were crowded with the solidified and cemented sand in such a way as they could only have been only by its being driven into them in a semi-fluid mass, condition which the gravels have never had since they were first laid down. Let the skull tell its own story and believe what it says, because it brings its own proof. Just look at the skull. Whatever age belongs to the gravel belongs to the Calaveras skull, entirely irrespective of the question of honesty or dishonesty in the alleged finder. Whether he found it, I believe it's to the age to be beyond cavil, all right? So the guy's letting you know there. He's like, yo, it doesn't matter who found it. If we can trust the guy who found it, just look at the bone. It's a fossil. It has the same material, pleiocene material, gravel, all right? Thus, we also dispense with any thought that the Calaveras skull was originally a cave specimen, later planted in the mine below Bald Hill to fool Madison or anyone else. Those who examined the skull in its original condition said that it had, without question, come from the gold-bearing gravels, just like even even Alice Hadrilica said, but how did it get the gold on it? He couldn't even explain that. Now it says here, other human remains found in the gravel. So remember, it's not just the Calaveras skull. It's not just this. Now, I just want to point out something I haven't even pointed out. I think if we did point out in the beginning, Calaveras in Spanish means skull. And the reason that place in California was called Calaveras County is because they were finding so many skulls there, washing down the river. Now, they're trying to say most of these are modern, but how do they know? Because they try to lie about this one. They try to lie about this one. So how do you know they haven't found really old bones and they just said it was modern? They were washing down the river. All right, so another matter often overlooked by those seeking to discredit the Calaveras skull is the fact that numerous other human remains have been reported as having been found in the auriferous gravels. Whitney in 1880 makes mention of numerous human fossil remains in his book, The Auriferous Gravels of the Sierra Nevada of California. It now bears repeating Whitney's reports of some of these finds. The Calaveras skull was only one of many human remains found in the gravels during the last century digging by gold miners. Numerous jokes or outright lies would have to be involved in these other cases, all right? So where's the jokes in these other cases, right? And there is no basis for such a conclusion. Some of these human remains date prior to the discovery of the Calaveras skull in 1866 and the great controversy it generated. These earlier finds are also strong indication that the Calaveras skull is no fluke or of the fossil record in that area. All right, we're in the University of Chicago Press journals, the American Society of Naturalists. It says here, The Ancient Man of Calaveras by W. Iris, the American naturalist. This is from 1882. All right, it says The Ancient Man of Calaveras If the minds of almost all the existence of prehistoric man in California is associated mainly with the famous Calaveras skull, and as much as doubt has been cast on the authenticity of that relic, the whole subject has been badly neglected. All right, it has been badly neglected, but not no more. Okay, that's why I'm doing this. It's not going to be neglected anymore. Make sure you use this when you're debating people, because they cannot prove this wrong. And even by men of science has been unreasonably set aside. We will speak of that skull presently, but it is only one of the many evidences to be considered, and we will at first put it out of view. We shall find that if it had never come to light at all, the proofs that man existed when, or rather before, the auriferous gravel was deposited are so complete that he who doubts them would as readily doubt that Napoleon Bonaparte died on the island of St. Helena. All right, so he's making a point there. He's saying, if you don't believe this, then don't believe anything that is supposed to be mainstream history accepted as fact, because this is fact. I might as well not believe anything then. You might as well not believe anything then. Who do you believe then? If scientists are telling you this is a fossil, the auriferous gravel of the books is the pay dirt of the miners, and that we may know what the existence of man at the time of his deposit means, we must endeavor to ascertain how long ago the deposit occurred. If we say to a geologist that gravel of Pleiocene age, he carries back his thoughts over an interval of which the years reckoned by thousands are never counted, though he knows that thousands must be very many. So again, he's saying, you tell people Pliocene, like in the beginning of this video, I wanted to make sure you guys understood what Pliocene meant. And for a lot of people, that just be like, oh, that's so long ago. Man, okay, well, what's the difference? Pliocene, Neocene, Miocene, Mycene, whatever, right? Because it's so many thousands of years back, actually millions. But for those to whom Pliocene and post-Pliocene sound like barbarous terms, it may be possible to adduce a form of proof which appeals to the eye, and which brings with it, therefore, a force which all can appreciate. It is well to state at the outset that the pay dirt is manifestly all of one formation and of one geological age. Wherever we find it, some of it's lying open and exposed, we will let that pass. Some of it covered by volcanic rock, and of course itself older than the rock. That is, the lava flowed out and covered the gravel after the gravel was in the present form and position. That is sure, for after the gravel was thus embedded, it has most certainly never been disturbed, and within the last few years the miners have dug into it in search of gold. To the gravel then below the lava we will turn our attention. He's letting you know that was found there. If now we find the remains of man, or works which none but man could have made, among the gravel beds beneath Table Mountain, or in any other place amid the undisturbed pay dirt, we cannot fail to know that human hands and human brains had done their work before the immense canyons of Sierra Nevada commenced their formation in the little furrows near the summit down which the waters trickled. Right? We can take the proofs only in brief, and we will take none but those which are absolutely established and authentic. The Perez Snell of Sonora had in his collection, all right, a human jaw which was brought out in a carload of pay dirt from a shaft stretching far beneath the Table Mountain, and with it were several stone implements. Dr. Snell did not himself see this bone in the car as it was drawn to the surface, and in the minds of some doubt might thus be thrown of its authenticity. The specimen was given to him by a miner. If it were an isolated instance, this would be possibly worth considering, but it is only one of many. At the same time, it is only fair to state that there could not have been found a miner in all that region who could have thought it worth his while to attempt a deception, nor even one who had any doubt in his own mind as to the point we are considering. They saw the product of man's work come out with the gravel too often to pay commonly any attention to them. The only wonder is that he even took the trouble to pick out the bone at all. There can be no question that for one such that has been preserved, dozens and perhaps hundreds have gone down in the current of water in the Sluice, washing, all right, making a point again, how many have not been found. In 1857, Colonel Hubbs, who was afterwards state superintendent of instruction, found a load of dirt as it came out from his claim under Table Mountain, portions of a human skull. He was on the ground himself and saw the fragments as they were taken out of the sluice. They had come from a distance of 180 feet beneath the lava. One of the pieces is now the collection of the Boston Society of Natural History, the other in that of the Philadelphia Academy. And again, if it's hoaxes, if these are fake, why are these institutions holding these relics? You tell me. Mr. O.W. Stevens certifies that in 1853 he found a shaft under Table Mountain, about 200 feet in, a relic that resembled a large stone bead, a white marble about an inch and a half long and an inch and a fourth in diameter, with a hole through it a fourth of an inch across. Dr. Snell had in his collection a stone muller or pestle, which he took his own hands from a carload of dirt as it came out from under Table Mountain. Mr. Llewellyn Price certifies that in 1862 he dug up a stone mortar under Table Mountain at a depth of about 200 feet from the surface and about 1,800 feet in from the mouth of the tunnel. But why need we specify any further single instances? The witnesses already given were all credible and worthy men. They could have not possible collusion. They had no motive for deception, and the circumstances were such that they could not well be deceived as to what they stated. If any candid person will not be convinced by the evidence they give, he would be equally incredulous. He would be equally incredulous were 100 more to testify to the same truth. So they're saying, if nobody's going to believe, they're just going to doubt everything anyways. Because if you don't believe all these facts, all this science, then why bother with this person? Just like what we're dealing with today, right? Trying to teach people this truth, America, the true world, that there were so-called other people here, many phenotypes here in America, not just one phenotype, not just Mongols, all right? And you know how people take it. So it gets to the point where you're like, you know what? I'm not even going to bother with you because you're just going to deny everything. So it doesn't matter if I show you 100 Calaveras skulls, you're still going to go with the hijack because you're part of the hijack. And the hundreds more could be summoned were it worth the while. For the instances in which the products of human work, manship, have been washed out of the gravel and searching for gold are altogether too numerous for record, too numerous. Very many of them are now in the Museum of the University of California, and very many more were disregarded and lost, for so common that they become during the days of surface mining that at length the miners paid no attention to them, and they simply went in with the refuse of the workings. They were almost universally implements of stone, such as mortars, pestles, root bases, or platters, that is, articles which could be used for grinding food, but all rough and workmanship, and evidently fabricated by people low in the scale of civilization, but such as they are, they show with what appears to be conclusive proof that they were made before Table Mountain lava was erupted, before volcanoes even erupted, and perhaps long before they were also surely made before the auriferous gravels were deposited. One item comes naturally to our consideration here in the line of confirmation. The auriferous gravel contains abundant remains of plants and animals. Mastodons and elephants appear. All right, animals. We already know animals, right? That have specially abounded in no other part of the world have their bones and teeth been found in greater numbers. All right, these animals, right, greater numbers than any other part of the world. Why these ancient animals, elephants, rhinos, horses, llamas, camel, lion, all this here in America, very numerous. We've gone over the information. Check out my previous videos of the ancient animals of America. So again, numerous animals as well. Don't forget that being found with these humans, numerous animals. But all these were types long since passed away, and the same can be said of the leaves and fossilized wood. Dr. Newberry's report characterizes them as being entirely unlike anything now growing in California and as belonging to the Tertiary Age and later Pleiocene. Now we know that fauna and flora of a country cannot be completely changed except through the intervention of a very great space and time for the agency of a sudden cataclysm and reconstruction. And shall we now compare them in age with others which are absolutely prehistoric and which have disturbed the scientific world by their venerable antiquity? All right, it's controversial. Yeah, America, the true old world, is very controversial to say that. Yeah, fierce have been the conflicts waged over the Neanderthal skull, the Angus skull, the man of Cro-Magnon, and the various other relics gathered from the gravels and bone reactors of Europe. But their record is dwarfed to comparative insignificance when laid by the side of that to which we have been looking. Did you just hear what he just said? It ain't nothing. Those things they found in Europe is nothing compared to what we're talking about right now. What they're gonna talk about because it's older. It's older. The Calaveras skull is older than what they found in Europe. That means that this is the oldest, oldest so far. Because I know we've talked about the Guadalupe woman, right? 20 to 25 million year old deposit according to their geological scale. So we got both these things in America. Again, the days of Table Mountain had passed off into the dark realm of the forgotten past, ages before the drift of the Valley of Simone was deposited, or the man of Neanderthal lived, all right? Way before those things over there in Europe. Those European relics have by none been counted older than the post-Pleiocene. That's not even old. These are the Sierra Nevada, go back to the Pleiocene. See, the ones over here go back to the Pleiocene, older. And as the New World, right, in parentheses, of modern style, was the very oldest and showing itself above the waste of waters. Oh, what he just said right there, man. Hold up. Are you guys listening to what he's saying right there? He just said a fact we already know. What did Louis Agassiz tell us? What did the Maya tell us? What did most of science and most of correlations telling us? That America has the oldest land that came out of the waters. What? Because we know, again, he says that this new world, in parentheses, which is not a new world, is the very oldest and shown itself above the waste of water. So perhaps it was also the first to feel the step of man. Maybe it was also the first to have man. Again, we already know the oldest land is from here. We're finding the oldest bones. We know agriculture started here, oldest civilizations. Let's start putting two and two together, okay? Let's stop being logical because these European relics, they're not older than the post-Pleiocene, all right? And if we have the oldest land, why not? Perhaps it was also the first to feel the step of man, America. It is possible that the discoveries of Ribeiro in Portugal and of the English Geological Survey in India may be found to carry us as far back as the times we have been discussing, but they have thus far been strangely ignored. That it came to Professor Whitney from the hands of Mr. Madison, or as I always heard him called, Matthewson or Angel's camp is certain. Where did Mr. Madison get that skull? I do not know, nor is the precise spot of much consequence. He says he took it from his shaft near what then called the forks of the road above Angels. Suppose he did, or suppose he foolishly tried to humbug the geologist. What does it matter? He got the skull somewhere, and wherever it might have been first found, it surely was embedded in the auriferous gravel, so it doesn't matter if he tried to, maybe came from somewhere else, he tried to get the credit. But it doesn't, it's still a fossil. It still has that same material on it. It's still a fossil from that same material. It was still found in that same material. And it had become so embedded at the time the gravel was originally deposited. You say that it is a bold assertion? How do you know it? I will tell you, all right? So that's what we already read, because the skull told me so. All right, he says, no. Let the skull tell its own story and believe what it says, because it brings its own proof. Whatever age belongs to the gravel deposit on the Table Mountain belongs to the Calaveras skull entirely, all right? It says here, its degree of fossilization has not been here insisted upon, because that change is more rapid in some localities than in others. But it is interesting fact that this Calavera skull is more thoroughly fossilized. Greater proportion of its phosphate of lime has become carbonate than in either of the European specimens which are reckoned of the greatest age. Do you hear that? We seem them fairly entitled to consider the ancient man of Calaveras the oldest representative of our race, to which we can as yet refer, and being such is he of a bestial type, look for yourself. Figures have been published by Professor Whitney and his work. What is their bestial as shown by them? A single skull cannot of course speak for a whole race, but so far as this specimen can testify, what man is now man was then. It manifests no sign of inferiority to the American race, as now existent, barbarous in habit, he doubtless may have been. All the relics of workmanship thus far discovered of those coeval with him and dictated low-grade civilization, yet one not necessarily much, if at all, lower than that of most of the Indian tribes which formerly occupied the entire breadth of the continent, and an intellectual power, judging from his cerebral development, he might as surely have claimed a fair average rank. The Americans of antiquity, their origin, migrations, and type of civilization considered by John T. Short. This is from 1880. If all the indications were verified, we should be justified in assigning men a much greater antiquity in the Rocky Mountains region and on the Pacific slope than in any other part of the North America. Mr. E. L. Berter collected numerous stone implements and what he considers to be tertiary gravel. All right, and another source telling us human implements and millions of years old deposits. Tertiary, all right, on Crow Creek and in the region of South Platte River. Two shells secured in the same locality by him have been pronounced a corbicula and a rangier respectively and are thought to belong to older Pleiocene or possible to Miocene. Miocene, man, that's even older than Pleiocene. All right, talking about really millions of years old. The evidence in this case is, however, unsatisfactory and cannot be admitted to be a scientific value without further authentication. In 1857, a portion of a human cranium, all right, a human cranium was found associated with bones of the mastodon at the depth of 180 feet below the surface in a mining shaft at the Table Mountain, California. Dr. C.F. Winslow sent this fragment to the Boston Natural History Society, but no importance was attached to it since no other evidence other than that furnished by workmen in the mine could be obtained. Subsequently, when an entire skull was reported to have been found in the gold drift near Angelos in Calaveras County, and a shaft 150 feet deep, the intelligent portion of the community pronounced the finder guilty of scientific fraud, and it is not yet a certainty that their decision was incorrect. However, Professor Whitney of the State Geological Survey, upon a hearing of the case, examined the mine and found that the shafts passed through 5 beds of lava and volcanic tufa and 4 beds of auriferous gravel. It was in one of these beds that the skull was said to have been found. Some of the cemented gravel was still adherent to the skull when it came to Professor's profession, and Professor Wyman, to whom it was submitted subsequently, refers to the difficulty which he had in removing the incrustation. Professor Whitney, on the testimony of the possessor of the skull, pronounced it an authentic find, and while his decision has been acquiesced in by a number of scientific gentlemen of repute, Professor Wyman among them, still the great majority, we believe, are unwilling to rest their faith on such slender evidence, though no crack has apparent, though through which the skull might have fallen from the surface, such might have existed at an earlier period. In a region which is the product of volcanic action, there is room for suspicion, especially cases like both of these. So in this book, they're like, okay, there is this find. They're letting you know it's reported. They're letting you know it's historic, right? We got scholarly people dealing with it, writing scholarly journals on it, but they're trying to still question it. Like, we got to question it, still some suspicion. Why? Because it doesn't fit with your out of Africa theory, right? Says no geologist was present at the moment of the discovery to see the fossil in situ and he just called it a fossil, right? So it's a fossil. It's really old and extricated with his own hands from the matrix which contained it. President, a preliminary revision of the evidence relating to the auriferous gravel man in California by William H. Holmes. Look up who William H. Holmes is, very renowned, reputable person who actually tried to debunk the skull, but he really couldn't debunk it. He just left the thought out there, like, we have to really think about it. But he tells you something very important here. He lets us know, that there's a lot of evidence, though, to look over. All right. So it says, during recent years, much has been said and written regarding the antiquity of man in America, and as opportunity has presented, I have been engaged in the discussion of the subject, endeavoring to determine the exact value of the evidence brought forward by the various observers. By far the strongest body of data tending to establish the existence of a man of great antiquity is that emanating from the gold belt of California, and first brought together by Professor James D. Whitney and published in his notable work on the auriferous gravels. There's considerable literature embodying original observations outside of this volume, the most important contributions being a paper by Dr. George F. Becker, published in the Bulletin of the Geological Society of America for 1891. So even Mr. Holmes is letting us know that not only did Whitney write a very scholarly and show a lot of proof and correlations, so did Dr. George F. Becker and these other people. It says, in September 1898, I received instructions from the secretary of the Smithsonian Institute to visit California for the purpose of making of collections and prosecuting anthropological investigations along such lands as might promise to be of value to the National Museum. In other words, they sent him to make sure, you better go make sure, you better go try to debunk them. Like the Smithsonian is letting them know, you better go investigate, right? Prosecuting anthropological investigations. It was arranged that the work should be conducted under the auspices of the director of the Bureau of American Ethnology. A short time before setting out, I learned that Professor W.J.M. McGee was contemplating a trip to the Southwest a little later in the season, and I succeeded in inducing him to join me for a short time in the auriferous gravel region. I thus had the advantage of conjoint work with him in section of superlative interest geologically, archaeologically, and scenically, and one that has been made classic in science by Whitney and in song by Bret Harte. The poem, right? So Professor Whitney found that the gold-bearing gravel deposits were in the main very old, that their formation began at least the middle Tertiary time and continued down to the end of the Pliocene period, and in fact in varying degrees down to the present time. Remember, Pliocene, we're talking about millions of years old. Examining the evidence with the utmost care, he found it impossible to avoid the conclusion that many of the relics of man and his arts came from those portions of the gravel that could with reasonable certainty be assigned to the Pliocene. All right, again, Pliocene, man in America. That these finds were associated with the remains of extinct species of animals and plants, that they represented a race of ordinary physical characters, though having a culture of the lowest range compatible with the human status. He pointed out that a prominent feature of the evidence was its coherency, coming from multitude of independent sources and from widely distributed localities. It all pointed in one direction. There was no suggestion of the manufacture of evidence and no apparent motive for deception. All right, no apparent motive. Mr. William Holmes is letting you know. The observations were all those of miners, but a long chain of circumstantial evidence is frequently more convincing than a single statement of an expert eyewitness. He's saying it's not just one person, it's multiple people you telling you the same thing. Since Whitney's time, the evidence has been strengthened by Becker, and especially by his statement that Mr. Clarence King, director of the survey of the 40th parallel, found a pestle in the toothless deposits under the lava cap of Tulumo Table Mountain and removed it from the matrix with his own hands. So even other geologists, other people with renowned respect, are even finding it themselves, just grabbing it off the dirt coming in. We read that earlier, same thing. It is impossible to be deeply impressed by the amount of consistent nature of evidence presented. All right, listen, it is impossible not to be deeply impressed by the amount of consistent nature of the evidence presented, just such as the magnitude of the proposition to be sustained, that even this testimony seems inadequate. And we seek by re-examination and renewed research to determine exact strength and true significance, because he can't believe it. It's just impossible to him, to this Holmes, because he's so mainstream. He's cool with Adrika and all these people. He's like, oh man, it has to be, it's impossible. We got to re-examine this, so much evidence. But it said the accompanying sections with appended data will serve to tell the story so fully that a few words only will be necessary to make it fully understood. In early Tertiary times, the prototypes of the modern rivers ran out from the Sierra down through the. All right, so it's still talking about how it was formed. All right, you see, but people can understand, so you can understand. So this is the categories of gravel finds listed by Holmes here. It says, having reached satisfactory and apparently final conclusions respecting the age of the auriferous gravels themselves, it is in order to examine the various groups of associated phenomena with which archaeologists must concern themselves. There are 4 categories of data to be considered. So this is what they're trying to debunk or not. You get it? He's talking in good terms, but he's really trying to say something else. All right? This is what they want to question. The Smithsonian sent him. Remember, the Smithsonian sent him to question this. the animal remains, the plant remains, the remains of man, and the remains of human handiwork. All right. So C, right? C, human remains reported from the gravels are not plentiful, and at all that appear to have been preserved are imperfect human cranium known as the Calaveras skull, and a few unimportant fragments of another skull. Fragments of skulls and various bones of the body have been reported from the old gravels in a number of localities. These remains, and especially the Calaveras skull, indicate a man not different materially from the Californian Indian of today, although said by Whitney to present some characteristics of the Eskimo. The remains of human handiwork to be considered are, on the other hand, quite numerous. Many hundreds of specimens have been reported from the gravels and are believed in a general way to belong to the Neocene deposits. According to the finders, many of them were intimately associated with remains of fossil animals and plants, and some appear to be from gravels that antedate the volcanic era. All right. And so, again, just some examples. We saw a couple of them early on in this presentation. Again, these are not artificial things, these are made by man. And they're finding these things, not just skulls. Remember, okay, so how do you explain these items? You want to try to debunk the skulls. You want to say it's a joke. How do you explain the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of implements, the flints, the weapons, tools that they find in these deposits? They're not supposed to be there. They're not supposed to be there. How can so many people fake so many things and have so many accounts, so many people involved, and over a period of years in different areas, not just in California, but all over the US, all over the Americas, and all over the world? Forbidding archaeology. All right, this is the hidden history of the human race, forbidding archaeology. All right, so it says here. So he's basically listing things that are found. So 6.2 is the human skeleton remains from the California Gold Country, the Pleiocene to Eocene. In the preceding chapter, we discussed the numerous stone implements discovered in the auriferous gravels of the Sierra Nevada mountains of California. Some of these implements were found beneath the latite cap of the Table Mountain in Toluca County. We noted that this latite cap has yielded radiometric dates of 9 million years, while the pre-volcanic auriferous gravels lying just above the bedrock have yielded dates of 33 to 55 million years. Now, we will describe human skeletal remains that have been discovered beneath the latite cap of Toluca Table Mountain and elsewhere in California. We will begin our review with the Calaveras skull, the history of which is colorful but inconclusive. The accounts of the remaining discoveries, although less entertaining, provide better evidence for a human presence in Tertiary. All right, and it says here, the most notorious fossil discovered in the gold rush mines of California was the Calaveras skull. The state geologist California J.D. Whitney described the circumstances surrounding the find, and so he describes how Mr. Madison gave it to him and where it was found. And says here, since the skull occurred near the bottom of the sequence of interspecies gravel and lava layers of Bald Hill, it would seem likely that the gravel in which the skull was found was older than the Pleiocene, perhaps much older. After the finding of the skull, Madison later carried it to Mr. Scribner. All right, so we got all this before, and then it says Mr. Whitney presented to the California Academy of Science a report on the Calaveras skull, affirming that it was found in Pleiocene strata. A state geologist, remember, this is a renowned person. He affirmed that it was found in Pleiocene strata. It is a Pleiocene man. The skull caused a great sensation in America. All right, according to Whitney, the religious press in the country took the matter up and were quite unanimous in declaring the Calaveras skull to be a hoax. Again, the religious press, the religious people, all these gatekeepers wanted to say it was a hoax. And now we're in the proceedings of the Academy of January 10th of Mr. Arthur Irwin Brown in the chair. All right, I forgot the name, but this is actually proceedings of something geology. I didn't get that actual page, left that out. But this says here, Mr. Arthur Irwin Brown in the chair. This is from 1899, 32%, a paper entitled New and Interesting Species in the Isaac Leah Collection of Eocene Mollusca. And then it says here the death of Francis. So this is what they're talking about, and also they're going to talk about what? The Calaveras skull. Now it says here, Mr. William H. Dahl called the attention to the fact that the authenticity of the celebrated Calaveras skull, about which so much controversy had arisen in 1866, has recently again been called in question. It seems to him as the small number of persons who were cognizant of the facts when they occurred is already greatly reduced, that it would be desirable to put on record his own testimony as an eyewitness to some of them, which in his opinion are incompatible with the theory that a hoax had been perpetrated. All right, so he doesn't believe the hoax, or a skull from some recent burial place subject to the lime deposit from Springs, fraudulently foisted upon Professor J.D. Whitney and his associates in the state. So he doesn't believe that whole story of the joke. All right. Mr. Dahl described briefly the nature of the formations which make up the Table Mountain of the region alluded to, consisting of the beds of basaltic lava, more or less alternated with gravel, which filled the prehistoric stream beds in which gold was sought by means of tunnels from the side or shafts from above, and which are now practically abandoned since the return of no pay for the labor. He was in California at the time of discovery, and in June 1866 examined the skull when in the office of the state geologist in the presence of Professor Whitney. So this person right here, specifically William Dahl, actually saw the skull in person. It says here, William H. Gabb, W. Afner, Dr. James Blake, and others, of whom the speaker is the only present survivor. They were all there. All those people were there. The skull was then in the condition in which it was first obtained, except that a portion of the gravel which had originally covered the whole of it had been removed by Messrs. Madison and Scribner, the finder and first receiver, from the anterior dome and right side of the cranium. The rest of it was still filled or covered by a hard mass of small gravel stones cemented together by iron oxide and calcareous cement, so that a tool was necessary to separate or remove the pebbles and other particles of which the conglomerate was made up. These pebbles were obviously water-worn, and mixed with them were particles of other human bones, a perforated shell, ornamented or bead of small size, and the fossilized remains of thin and fragile shell ornament or bead small size, and the fossilized remains of a thin and fragile snail shell, recognizable as the still existing helix. All right, so that's what they found. So it definitely old. It has all this material. It was the speaker's opinion that by no artificial agency could such a conglomerate have been assembled about a recent skull. So you can't fake that. Again, another person given a lecture to these people in the proceedings of this meeting on this day, scholarly meeting. I forgot which one it was. I got the, but you already know we got so much sources. You know I don't deal with pseudoness. All right. So he's letting you know, another person, that it's not a hoax. It's not a joke, and they cannot fake a fossil. You cannot fake this skull. And the sight of it was sufficient proof. Just looking at it, just going with your own eyes, proof the fact to any reasonable person. Unfortunately, however, no photographs were taken of the specimen in this condition, or at least none are recorded. And when it was placed in the hands of the celebrated anatomist, Dr. Jeffries Wyman, the encrusting material was removed in order that the character of the skull should be determined. The specimen is now in the Museum of Comparative Zoology, and it is probable that part of the matrix is also preserved there. At all events, the recollection of the speaker was clear that the mass of the hard constructing conglomerate was composed of small pebbles with some ferruginous matter, entirely unlike the calcareous deposits from the calciferous water in the caves. So it's not coming from the caves, he's saying, because it doesn't match with the material in the caves. So it's not reason. They're talking about the cave that they said was more modern, that they brought it from and put it in there as a hoax. The mass of the material was not limey, but gravel, and all essentials resembling the material taken from the gravel beds under the lava, of which specimens were at hand for comparison. Subsequent examination showed that the skull had been violently fractured and that portions of bones of the extremities and sternum had been crowded into its interstices with the gravel. It was found among a lot of wood also included in the gravel, as if the prehistoric stream and flood had washed away part of its ancient graveyard and crushed the bones and timber into a miscellaneous heap of debris left behind as the waters fell. If, as has been intimated, the skull had been taken from some cave where the present Indians interred their dead and where remains had been gradually covered with a stalagmite crust, how is the peculiar agglomeration to be explained? Then how do you fake the rest of the stuff that the bone has? You can't make that up, the gravel. You can't make the fossilized material up. In the speaker's opinion, the attempts on the part of unscientific persons, people who are not scientists, of the vicinity to discredit the authenticity of the skull after it had attracted general attention were due to the spirit, unfortunately, too common among ignorant persons, ignorant people, unresearched people, pseudo people, people who don't do research, which leads them to disparage that in which they have no share, as the persons chiefly concerned made no attempts to utilize the discovery as a source of profit, and the coming of the specimen into specific hands was due to circumstances which could not have been foreseen. The speaker believed that so far no sufficient reason had been adduced for doubting the genuine character of the skull in its original situs below the lava, though the question of the coexistence of man and the extinct mammals whose remains have been found in the same gravel is entirely distinct and may reasonably be left open. So it says here, Prehistoric Races of the United States of America by J.W. Foster, LLD, author of the Physical Geography of the Mississippi Valley, joint author of Foster and White's Reports of the Geology of the Lake Superior Regions, late president of the American Association for the Advancement of Science, president of the Chicago Academy of Sciences, and member of the other learned societies. All right, very scholarly, okay? This is from 1887. Chapter 2, The Integrity of Man, Evidence in the United States. I have given in the preceding chapter a brief summary of the European evidences of the antiquity of our race as collected and collated by men of the highest scientific attainments. A deep feeling of his trust pervades the public mind of this country, in reference to every discovery which is supposed to carry back the origin of man to a period antecedent to the historical era. And yet, reasoning from paleontological analogies, we ought to expect to find evidences of the human occupancy of this continent reaching back to the antiquity as remote as on the European continent, all right? Just as old as over there. So who's to say who's older? Nor are such evidences wanting, although less abundant and less conclusive, but when our superficial deposits shall have been as thoroughly investigated as those of Europe, we may expect to find proofs of the existence of an elder man equally authentic. The result hitherto obtained are of a nature to stimulate us to renewed exertions and to encourage the hope that this country will afford the materials to aid in the interpretation of one of the most interesting pages in the history of the past. And it says here, evidences of man's work in the gold drift of California. This was written by Dr. C.F. Winslow. This is where they're getting it from. It says in 1857, Dr. C.F. Winslow sent to the Boston Natural History Museum the fragment of a human cranium found in the pay dirt in connection with the bones of the mastodon, an elephant, 180 feet below the surface of Table Mountain, California. Dr. Winslow has described to me all the particulars in reference to this find, and there is no doubt in his mind that the remains of man and the great quadrupeds were deposited contemporaneously, all right? There's no doubt. Humans were with these animals, these elephants, walking with these elements, and this so-called Ice Age, and before that, in this Pliocene time. Another discovery of human cranium in the state, deep down in the gold drifts and covered with 5 successive overflows of lava, was looked upon with incredulity by what might be called the intelligent portion of the community, and the reputed finder was accused of an attempt to perpetrate a scientific fraud. But Professor Whitney, who succeeded in securing this relic for the Museum of the State Geological Survey, after careful examination of the locality where it has said to be found, and after having questioned the persons who had in their possession, arrived at the conclusion that the find was what? Authentic. It was authentic. This skull was found in a shaft 150 feet deep, 2 miles Angeles in Calaveras County. The shaft passed through the 5 beds of lava and volcanic tufa and 4 beds of auriferous gravel. The upper bed of tufa was homogeneous and without a crack through which a human relic could have been introduced into the lower bed, so nothing could have just slipped in there. The skull was given to Professor Wyman to describe, who found great difficulty in removing the cemented gravel with which it was encrusted. So he even had trouble taking it off. All right, so he can't deny that. It was subsequently submitted to the American Association for the Advancement of Science at the Chicago meeting in 1869, and Professor Whitney communicated a statement of the conditions under which it was found, but no report of his remarks was made. All right, they didn't care about it. They was just brushed it off. He gave them all this evidence. They didn't make no report about it. All right, portions of the cemented gravel yet adhere to the relic, though. This skull, admitting its authenticity, carries back that advent of man to the Pleiocene epoch. All right, how many times we're gonna get this? Pleiocene man in America, millions of years old. Stop believing these out of Africa theories, these Bering Strait theories. Stop believing all that. There's something here on the table that can question and prove all that wrong. All right, by many and backed up by many scholars and scientific investigation, examination. All right, so it goes back to the Pliocene epoch and is therefore older than the stone implements of the drift gravel of Abbeville and Amiens, or the relics furnished by the cave dirt of Belgium and France. All right, it's older than all those things in Europe. All right, it's older than that. Where's the true old world? With the regard of the gold drift of California, according to Mr. Whitney, there is nothing to indicate the former existence of the Great Northern Current, whose course on the eastern part of the continent is so conspicuously marked by the grooving and polishing of the rocks and the deposit of long trains of erratic blocks, and the absence of these phenomena is observed along the whole Pacific coast of the United States and the eastern flanks of the Rocky Mountains. But there is evidence that the Sierra Nevada, once occupied by glaciers, which in their descent ground up and dispersed the gold-bearing quartz and entombed the remains of the fossil elephant and other contemporary animals. The fossil elephant and other contemporary, the age of these gravels is referred by Professor Whitney to the Pliocene, or the age before the volcanic eruptions which cover a greater part of the state took place. Since the introduction then, a man, the physical features as well as the climate of this region have undergone great changes. The volcanic peaks of the Sierra have been lifted up, the glaciers have disappeared, the great canyons themselves have been excavated in the solid rock, and what were once the beds of streams now form the table mountains. All right, so that was a little bit on that on this book. Now this part right here is very interesting. It says parallelism, so you could just compare what he's trying to compare. It says parallelism to the antiquity of man in the two hemispheres. It says here, assuming as authentic the more obscure traces of human art and human remains found in the United States, I submit the following classification of the respective deposits. It says here, Miocene, Europe, flints and calcaire de Beaune, Pontevaux with Assolin. All right. So flints in Europe, right? Flint flakes in the beds of Relic and hack bones of Ponent. This is the Miocene. Hack bones. It says all these instances require further authentication, so they don't even know. Now it says in the same time period, remember, Miocene is from 9 million to up to 55 million years ago. It says flint flakes, so this is made by humans, in the gravel beds of Colorado and Wyoming with shells belonging to the genera Corbicularrania. All right. And Pliocene, hacked bones in the beds of press associated with elephants. This is in Europe. Evidence not conclusive. Look what it says here. Evidence not conclusive. But at the same time, we got a human skull found in the Calaveras County in California in the Pliocene period and America. All right. The antiquity of man, contemporaneous terrestrial animals of the two continents. Look at this. I'm going to show you something. This is big. Europe and North America, right? All right. So far, we got it. Oh, wait, what happened? Who got more animals? Who got more animals? Europe or North America? So we're at the almost at the end here. It says contributions to American geology, by Volume 1, from the members of the Museum of Comparative Zoology at Cambridge, Massachusetts. This is from 1880. It says here the auriferous gravels of the Sierra Nevada of California by J.D. Whitney. It says here section 5. We now come to a most interesting portion of this volume, namely the occurrence of human remains and the works of human hands and the various deposits which have been described in the preceding pages. And in commencing this section, it is necessary to say a few words in addition to what has been previously stated in regard to the nature of the evidence which is here to be brought forward, bearing on the question of the antiquity of the human race. It is true that there was a time, but a few years ago, when no attention whatever was paid to any statements which seemed, if not to prove, at least lend probability to the theory that the epoch of the appearance of man on earth must be carried back into the shadowy past of geological time. The writer well remembers how a little more than 20 years ago, the first statements, I remember this is from the 1800s, so they're still trying to figure out what's the age of man in these times. There's no clear consensus, right? All right, there's no hijacks yet after the 1900s. The writer well remembers how little more than 20 years ago, the first statements of Boucher de Perdius in regard to the finding of flint implements in the drift of various localities near Abbeville, France, began to circulate in the country, which was incredibly they were received. All right, so just 20 years before they wrote this, they were just finding those modern humans in Europe. So they didn't even have no evidence before that yet of modern humans. They only had monkey bones coming out of Africa. Gradually, however, the evidence has accumulated from widely separated regions until the idea of prehistoric man has become familiar to geologists. So they had to first declare that man could live in the Pliocene time, even in Europe. That was still controversial in those times, right? So they accepted that over there. Well, eventually they got to accept that over here too. All right, we got more evidence of that. More, more evidence of that. The great question now is how far back can man and his works be traced? And in regard to this point, a large stone of reputed facts are gradually being brought together, and most geologists are ready and willing to examine them and discuss their authenticity, the time having gone by when they were contemporaneously thrown aside as conflicting with one of the fundamental ideas of the science. The following pages are offered therefore as contribution to history of prehistoric man, as setting forth the results obtained during several years of geological work in California, years in which this subject was not made a special object of research, but when facts which came under our observation were examined into so far as time and circumstances admitted, and which taken together form a considerable body of material. All right, Mr. Whitney's letting you know, hey, yeah, we just figured this out, but we just put all our tests and theories into these examinations, and what they're concluding, hey man, it's important and it's changing history, and that's why he wrote this, right? It says, before entering upon the setting forth of what has been collected relating to the antiquity of man in California, it will be desirable to say that a few words in regards to the nature of evidence presented and the manner in which it has been collected. It will have become abundantly evident on what has been stated in the preceding pages that most of the material collected bearing on such a question as the one now under discussion must be expected to be a very fragmentary character. The nature of the auriferous deposits such as to preclude except in a few specially favored situations, any hope of finding any large number of fossils remains in an undisturbed position. So it's very hard to actually find fossils in this material, but they got lucky with this Calaveras skull. Objects found in the gravel must, of course, have been subjected to the same long continued course of abrasion and transportation as the material in which they are embedded has undergone. It has already been mentioned how, of several species of animals found in the auriferous detrital deposits, only a single tooth has as yet been obtained, while others are represented by 2 or 3 fragments of teeth or bones at most. The finger-grained beds, such as the pipe clay and sands, are usually productive in gold and therefore rarely worked except in cases of necessity. But it is in these that one would expect to find remains in the most perfect conditions and in the largest quantity, other circumstances being favorable. It will observe by the reader of the following pages that the bulk of the evidence presented in that furnished by the miners themselves, sometimes supported by the actual presence of the objects found, at other times without such support, there being only the bare statement of a former find. That the miners themselves should be in most cases the persons furnishing the evidence is too natural a circumstance to need comment. Their statements have to be taken as already suggested when speaking of the occurrence of animal remains in the gravel, for what they are worth balanced against each other and the most probable result accepted. A long chain of circumstantial evidence is frequently more convincing than a single statement of an eyewitness. It might be asked, why should not the writer or one of his assistants have been on the spot? All right, so they're saying, why isn't there? The answer to this is that such have not thus far proved to be sufficient comment to make it worthwhile to give up such an undertaking. The amount of time would probably be necessary to ensure success. They're saying, you know how much time that would take to have geologists go in there and look at all this tabletop mountain in California in the Calaveras County and to actually be looking for fossils? No, only people that have money and time to invest because they're looking for gold are actually going to go be the ones that are actually doing the archaeological work, actually mostly miners, right? It was believed that a better result would be secured by collecting a large body of reputed facts, even if observed by others, than by watching at any one locality in the hope that something of interest would turn up. The principal difficulties in the way of such a course has already been sufficiently hinted. When very important discoveries have been made, as in the case of the Calaveras, the locality has been visited and carefully examined in order that the geological conditions of the currents might be fully comprehended. With these preliminary remarks, we proceed to lay before the reader the facts which have been collected, mentioning them in geographical order, while thus going, as a general rule, rapidly over the ground. Certain special occurrences deemed to be more importance than others, for reasons which will be given, will be taken up and enlarged upon as full details as possible being presented. All right, at this point, it will be proper to mention the valuable services rendered in the collection of evidence bearing on the antiquity of man in California by Dr. C.D. Voy, who, partly in the employ of Geological Survey, but chiefly as a volunteer, traveled over the state of intervals during several years investigating and gathering materials in this department. His ample collection at present belong to the University of California, where they may be examined by those interested. All right. Come now to a county where occurrences of human remains do not seem to have been as frequent as they were in the adjacent Tuolumne, but one specimen has been obtained which has excited more interest than all others put together, and which is popularly believed to be the only instance of the kind which has been met with in California. A perusal of the previous and of the following pages will, however, it is thought satisfy the reader that the belief of the existence of man in that region previous to the cessation of volcanic activity there does not by any means backed up by one item of evidence alone. It's not just one thing. So again, people living there before volcanic activity. The peculiar interest of the so-called Calaveras skull depends in good part on the fact that it is thus far the only relic of the skeleton of prehistoric man in California, which has come into the hands of scientific authorities. All right, it has come into the hand of scientific authorities. All right, and these people said it was authentic. Remember, in such a condition of completeness as to give some basis for ethnological conclusions, or at least for craniological measurements. Public attention has been so much attracted to the Calaveras skull, and so much has been said and written about it, that it will be well for the writer to state what he knows with some detail in regard to this find, in order that those who are interested in the subject may have all the facts which are at hand on which to base their opinion. The manner in which the skull in question came into the writer's possession is as follows. All right, so we know the story of how he got it from was it Matthew? Yeah, Madison. He gave it to Jones, and Jones handed it over to Mr. Whitman. Now it says here the skull is by no means a perfect one, as the whole of the parietal and nearly the whole of the occipital, as well as the large part of the right half of the base, are missing. So it says here, this describes the appearance of the skull as it now exists. When delivered into the writer's hand, its base was embedded in a conglomerate mass of ferruginous earth, water-worn pebbles of much altered volcanic rock called auriferous tufa, and fragments of bones. This mixed material covered the whole base of the skull and filled the left temporal fossa, concealing the whole of the jaw. A thin calcareous incrustation appears to have covered the whole skull when found. Portions of it had been scaled off, probably in cleaning away the other material attached to the base. All right, so he's letting you know. All right, this scholarly report letting you know this is bringing material that was definitely from the auriferous gravel. It's you cannot not fake that. You can't hoax that. You can't fake that. Nothing was done to the skull to alter its condition in any way after it came to the writer's hands until they had been examined by Dr. Wyman, when he together carefully chiseled off the foreign matter adhering to its base so as to fully expose the natural surface of the skull, leaving it in its present state. All right. So it wasn't until this guy Wyman took it off, but even before that, and Mr. Wyman is a very credible person. They believe Mr. Wyman. He was the one that removed it. He's like, yeah, it had gravel on it. Your fair gravel. On exposing the jaw, the skull was found to be that of a very old person. As the teeth, with the exception of a single root of a molar on the right side, have disappeared, all the alveoli and the front have been wholly, and those of the sides partly absorbed in consequence of this. If any peculiarity of the jaws existed, it is no longer to be recognized. In cutting away the mixed tufa and gravel which covered the face and base, several fragments of human bones were removed, namely one whole and one broken metatarsal, the lower end of left fibula, and fragments of an ulna, and well as a piece of sternum. These bones and fragments of bones might have belonged to the same individual to whom the skull had pertained. But besides these, there was a portion of a human tibia, too small size to be referred to as the same person. All right, so they're letting you know there was other pieces of bone stuck to it. Other pieces of bone stuck to the skull. There were also some fragments of the bones of a small mammal. Under the malar bone of the left side, a small snail shell was lodged, partially concealed by one of the small human bones which was wedged into the cavity. This shell was recognized by Dr. J.C. Cooper as Gila ramamonum, a species now extinct in the Sierra Nevada. So an extinct species stuck to this bone. So how did that extinct species get on this bone if it's a fake? Cemented to the fourth part of the roof of the mouth was found a circular piece of shell 4/10 of an inch in diameter with a hole drift through the center, which had probably served as an ornament. All right, you hear that ornament? Are you talking about earrings, like piercings? A piercing? You hear that? A piercing? Several very small pieces of charcoal were also found in the matter adhering to the base of the skull. On chemical examination of a portion of the skull by Mr. Sharpless, it was found that it had lost nearly all its organic matter, and that a large portion of the phosphate of lime had been replaced by the carbonate. In other words, people, it was a fossilized condition. This is a fossilized bone. This is not a fake. The following are the results of the analysis for all you scientists out there. All right, look at the chemical makeup of this fossilized bone. The skull having been coated with wax to protect it, the analysis was made on a piece which had been treated with either to remove any still adherent particles of this substance. This also took up any organic matter remaining over what originally existed there. A separate examination of another piece of the skull showed, however, that only trace of this existed. Such are the facts, all right? Such are the facts, all right? Such are the facts concerning the Calaveras skull, in regard to which there can be no dispute. It remains to describe the geological position in which it was said by Mr. Madison to have been found, and then to see how the facts overserved agree with his statements, and especially how far the condition and appearance of the skull itself lend plausibility to the theory, widely circulated and believed, that the final is a hoax. All right, that's just a theory. But the facts is concerned, and this is fossilized. There's no dispute. You can't dispute these facts. Such are the facts. According to Mr. Madison's statement, the skull was taken from a shaft which he himself had sunk on the northwest slope of the bald hill at a distance of just a half a mile northwest of Altaville. It is about a mile and a quarter northwest of Angelstock, the outcrop of the Great Quartz vein, intersecting the road between the two places and running close to and nearly parallel with it. All along the region adjacent to this road on the northwest is a series of moderately high tabletop elevations which rise from 300 to 400 feet above the bed of Angels Creek, which below the town of that name. Bald Hill is the most conspicuous of these hills, and it runs in the northwest direction of a mile. All right, so it's explaining where they found this. These the volcanic auriferous gravel deposits of Pleiocene time. All right, and it tells you the levels of feet of these levels right here. It says the skull on Mr. Madison's authority was found in bed number 8, which is the gravel, the lowest stratum of lava. The lowest stratum of lava. Immediately after visiting the locality, a notion of the discovery was presented to the California Academy of Sciences. A meeting held July 16, 1886. The debris in which the skull was embedded were not, however, removed, nor any chemical examination made of it until some 2 years later, after it had been taken to Cambridge. The supposed discovery created considerable interest and was generally looked upon with great suspicion. It has hardly received any notice in Europe. The religious press in the country took the matter up, however, and were quite unanimous in declaring the Calaveras skull to be a hoax. The religious people, right? One of the editors of the Pacific is so-called religious. All right, so that's how the people try to we already got this, how to try to say it was a hoax. By the time this valuable information reached Boston, it had become much more precise and authentic. For as may be learned from the Congressionalist, once more we have the highly developed Calaveras skull found in a shaft 150 feet under the volcanic deposits of California, where it had been placed by some mischievous miners as a hoax upon one of their own number who had, so this is what they were reporting. Having in the preceding pages set forth somewhat in detail the condition of the skull when received by Dr. Jones and described its appearance after being freed from the debris in which it was embedded, and having shown what the materials were thus found associated with it, remains to add a few remarks in the elucidation of the question how far the condition and appearance of this skull and all the facts connected with it justify us believing that the statement of Mr. Madison in regard to the place in which it was found may be accepted as true. Now it says here, the skull being as nearly deprived of its organic matter as fossil bones found in the tertiary usually are, and having had a large portion of its phosphate replaced by carbonate or lime, is undoubtedly a fossil. This is undoubtedly a fossil. Stop with the lies. It wasn't placed there as a whole, the fossil. Chemical analysis proves that it was not taken from the surface. All right, science will prove that, but that it was dug up somewhere from some place where it had been long deposited and where it had undergone those chemical changes, which so far as known, do not take place in objects buried near the surface. All right, this doesn't happen with things near the surface. In view of these undoubted facts, the absurdity of the statement previously quoted in regard to the placing of the skull in the shaft as a hoax to be played off on the anti-scriptural miner becomes apparent. The miners are supposed to have done this clever trick, must themselves have obtained from somewhere the object thus used, and all the diggings in that vicinity are in the gravels intercalated between the volcanic strata. It becomes really a matter of but little consequence from a geological point of view from whose shaft the skull was taken. The following are considerations then which lead us to put confidence in Mr. Madison's assertion as to his having taken the skull out of his own shaft and from the position already indicated. So he wasn't lying, because the same material that he brought the skull with was in the same place right there where he said he found it. All right, facts are facts. The appearance of the skull when it came into writer's hand, and especially an appearance when obtained by Mr. Scrivener, whose statement may be considered as beyond suspicion, shows that this is not an ordinary skull picked up at random in order that it might be palmed off as a curiosity on an unsuspecting Eastern geologist or even an anti-scriptural miner. The skull was unquestionably dug up somewhere and had unquestionably. I know you guys, it's getting late. I know I've been reading a lot. This may be boring. I just wanted to present all the facts to you. I'm basically almost done. This is the last thing. We're getting it from Whitney, his own mouth himself. All right, the most renowned person at that time in that state at this time, letting you know all the facts here. All the facts. It's unquestionably. All right. And the first place, it has been broken in such a manner as to indicate great violence, as the fractures go through the thickest and heaviest parts of the skull. Again, the evidence of violent and protracted motion, as seen in the manner in which the various bones were wedged into the hollow and internal parts of the skull. As for instance, the bones of the foot under the malar bone. The appearance of the skull was something much such as would be expected to result from its having been swept in many other bones from the place it was originally deposited down the shallow but violent current of streams where it would be exposed violent blows against boulders lying in the bed. All right, so explaining that, it even has it shows the history, the damage, the violence that went through. You can't fake that. All right. Mr. Madison told me that with his own hands he took the skull from the near bottom of the bed in the section given on page 269, and that it was found lying on the side of the channel with a mass of driftwood, and if it had been deposited there by an eddy of the stream. Right? We have an independent testimony of 3 witnesses, 2 of whom were previously known for the writer as men of intelligence and veracity, while in regard to the third, there is no reason for doubting his truthfulness. Each one of these gentlemen testified to some points in the chain of circumstantial evidence going to prove the genuineness of the find. No motive for deception on the part of Mr. Madison can be discovered, while the appearance of the skull itself bears strong, though silent, testimony to the correctness of his story. Just do the science, man. The following is Dr. Wyman's notice of the craniological peculiarities of the Calaveras skull. The volume of the frontal region is large, so that if the skull were viewed from above, the zygomatic arches would be nearly concealed. As a large part of the occiput is destroyed, it is uncertain whether the head was long or broad. The face is somewhat deformed, the left orbit being smaller and the left cheek higher than right, giving the whole an unsymmetrical appearance. Now it says the above seems all that is necessary to be said in this place in regard to the famous Calaveras skull. Further discussion of the fact may be reserved at the close of this section, and it is intended that the general resume of all resume of all the results of the gravel investigations, and a future chapter shall also include some additional remarks on the question of the antiquity of the human race on the Pacific coast and the catastrophes which it has survived. We may pass now to some other occurrences of similar character in the same county, but which have not as yet been laid before the public. The fact that human implements have been found in some of the mining claims near San Andreas and gravel under the volcanic strata was repeatedly mentioned to the writer by persons living in that vicinity and by Mr. Voy was successfully in finding some of the parties personally concerned in these finds and getting their writings testimony in regard to them. The geological conditions in the vicinity of San Andreas closely resemble those of the locality just described. This is again a drawing of the skull, and this is the Calaveras skull again. Bones of contention, right? Again, this can be up to 2.6 million years old, up to 9 million years old, some may say. All right, the Calaveras skull. This is authentic. I don't know if you learned anything today from this whole presentation, just know that this is an authentic find. You're going to read about hoaxes and stuff, dodge the hijack. We've gone over all the information here. Now you decide. All right, now you decide. What do you guys think? You guys tell me. Can I get over?